The storm hit without warning. One moment, the sea was calm, the sky clear, and my modest fishing vessel was steadily slicing through gentle waves. The next, a wall of black clouds swallowed the horizon, and the ocean turned violent. I fought to keep the boat steady, gripping the wheel with trembling hands as rain lashed at my face, and the wind screamed in my ears. It didn't matter. The waves were too powerful, the storm too fierce. The last thing I remembered was the sight of a monstrous wave rising above me, blotting out the faint light of the moon. It crashed down with a deafening roar, and the world went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on a cold, wet stone. The sound of waves crashing against rock echoed around me, though I couldn't see the ocean. My body ached, my head throbbed, and my clothes were soaked through. The salty tang of the sea clung to the air, but the storm was gone. I sat up, groaning, and took in my surroundings. I was on a narrow ledge of rock, high above the water, and in front of me stood a towering lighthouse. It was unlike any lighthouse I'd ever seen. The structure glowed faintly, its surface slick and shimmering like it was alive. Pale green light pulsed from within, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance and shift on the jagged rocks. I had no idea how I'd ended up here. My boat was gone, the storm a distant memory. But the strangest thing was the sound. Faint and melodic, it seemed to emanate from the lighthouse itself, a haunting tune that tugged at something deep inside me. It wasn't unpleasant, but it filled me with an inexplicable sense of longing. I stood, unsteady on my feet, and approached the lighthouse. Its entrance was a heavy iron door, crusted with salt and barnacles. With no other options, I pushed it open. It creaked loudly, the sound echoing into the unknown. The interior was as strange as the exterior. The walls were made of the same shimmering material, glowing softly and pulsing in rhythm with the melody. The air inside was humid and warm, carrying the scent of seaweed and brine. A spiral staircase wound upward, disappearing into the gloom above. I hesitated. Something about this place felt wrong, but curiosity, or perhaps the melody, drew me forward. I placed a hand on the cool, damp railing and began to climb. The first few steps felt ordinary, though the glow of the walls seemed to grow brighter as I ascended. The melody became clearer, more distinct, and I noticed subtle variations in the tune, like it was changing to match my movements. Every step echoed loudly, the sound swallowed quickly by the heavy, damp air. When I reached the first landing, I paused. A small room branched off the staircase, its entrance framed by an archway of twisted, organic shapes. Peering inside, I saw a figure standing in the center of the room, facing away from me. My heart leapt into my throat. "Hello!" I called out, my voice hoarse and shaky. The figure didn't respond. I stepped closer, my shoes squelching on the damp floor, and reached out a trembling hand. "Don't touch me." The voice was quiet but firm, and it froze me in place. The figure turned slowly to face me, and I saw that it was a man, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken. He wore tattered clothes, and his skin was translucent, almost glowing. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice heavy with weariness. "None of us should." "Who are you?" I asked, stepping back. "What is this place?" He shook his head, his gaze distant. "It's a trap, a lure. The melody brings us here, and we can never leave." I opened my mouth to respond, but he vanished before I could speak. A shimmer of light, a flicker of movement, and then nothing. The room was empty. The chill of fear crawled down my spine, but I pressed on. Something about the melody was changing again, growing more insistent, more urgent. It felt like it was pulling me upward toward whatever lay at the top of the lighthouse. As I continued to climb, I noticed other rooms branching off the staircase. Each one seemed to contain ghostly figures like the man I'd seen, each one recounting fragments of their stories in hushed, sorrowful tones. A sailor lost in a storm, a merchant whose ship sank without warning, and a passenger thrown overboard by unseen forces. Their voices overlapped, creating a tapestry of despair that filled the air, and always the melody played on, its haunting beauty weaving through their words like a thread. By the time I reached the next landing, I was trembling. My fear was tempered only by a growing determination to understand what this place was and why it had called me here. But deep down, I knew the answers wouldn't be easy to face. The next section of the lighthouse was different. The staircase grew narrower, the air thicker, and the glow of the walls pulsed faster, in time with the melody that had begun to take on an almost hypnotic quality. My steps slowed as the unease in my chest tightened like a coiled spring. At the next landing, I stepped into a large, circular room. The walls here were covered in faintly glowing symbols, patterns of spirals, waves, and other shapes I couldn't quite recognize. They seemed alive, writhing slightly as I tried to focus on them. The melody was louder here, more intricate, with layers of harmony that shouldn't have been possible. I felt it resonating in my bones, vibrating with an unsettling warmth. In the center of the room stood a table, and around it were 3 figures. Unlike the solitary man I'd encountered earlier, these people seemed aware of each other. They whispered among themselves, their voices low and urgent, but their faces were blank, their eyes glassy. I stepped closer, my presence drawing their attention. They turned toward me in unison, their movements unnaturally synchronized. A woman among them, with long, wet hair clinging to her face, spoke first. "You're new," she said, her voice echoing faintly as if carried from a distance. "How long have you been here?" "Not long," I replied, my throat dry. "I don't even know how I got here." "What is this place?" The man beside her, dressed in what looked like a century-old naval uniform, laughed bitterly. "This is the Lighthouse Beneath the Waves," he said, spreading his arms dramatically. "The beacon that calls to the lost. And once you're here, you're part of it." "That's not true," the woman interjected, shooting him a sharp glare. "There has to be a way out." "There isn't," the man said, his tone flat. "I've tried. We've all tried." The third figure, an older man with weathered features, stepped forward. "The melody," he said, his voice gravelly and strained. "It's alive. It draws us in, keeps us here. It feeds off us." "Feeds off us," I echoed, my skin prickling. "Hope," the woman said, her eyes fixed on mine. "It feeds on our hope. The longer you're here, the more you believe you can escape. But you can't. And when that hope finally dies, so do you." Her words hit me like a blow. I shook my head, refusing to believe them. "There has to be a way out," I said firmly. "There has to be." The older man's expression softened, a flicker of pity in his eyes. "You'll see," he murmured, turning away. The others followed him, and together they faded into the shadows of the room, leaving me alone with the symbols and the ever-present melody. I lingered for a moment, staring at the table they'd been gathered around. On its surface was a map, but it didn't show any land or recognizable features, only an endless expanse of water. At the center of the map was a glowing mark, pulsing faintly in time with the melody. It reminded me of a heartbeat. Shaking off the growing dread, I returned to the staircase and continued upward. The climb felt longer this time, the stairs seeming to twist and stretch impossibly. The walls closed in, and the glowing light grew so bright that it burned my eyes. The melody was deafening now, filling my mind and drowning out my thoughts. When I reached the next level, the air changed. It was colder, sharper, and the smell of salt was stronger than ever. I emerged into another room, smaller than the others, and in its center was something that made my heart stop. A mirror. It stood tall and narrow, its frame carved from the same shimmering material as the walls. Its surface was perfectly smooth, but it didn't reflect the room around it. Instead, it showed an image of the ocean, endless and tumultuous, with waves crashing violently against unseen shores. As I stepped closer, my reflection appeared, but it wasn't quite right. My movements were slightly delayed, and my expression distorted. The reflection stared back at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. Then, without warning, it smiled, a slow, unnatural grin that didn't match my own. I stumbled back, heart racing, as the reflection reached out toward the glass. Its fingers pressed against the surface, and for a moment I thought it would break through, but instead it spoke. "Why do you fight it?" it asked, its voice soft and mocking. "This place is all there is, all there ever will be." I couldn't answer. My mind was spinning, panic clawing at the edges of my thoughts. The reflection's smile widened. "You'll see," it said, echoing the words of the older man. "You'll see." The melody surged, drowning out everything else. I turned and fled, running blindly up the staircase, the haunting tune chasing me like a predator. The stairs seemed endless, twisting in impossible ways as I climbed. The melody grew sharper, more piercing, as though the lighthouse itself was alive and aware of my presence. It wasn't just calling to me anymore. It was demanding my surrender. Every step I took felt heavier, as if the very air was resisting my movements. Finally, I reached the top. The room at the summit of the lighthouse was vast and circular, its walls glowing with an intense, pulsating light that seemed to come from within the structure itself. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and atop it sat a strange, crystalline orb radiating the same pale green glow. The melody emanated from it, the notes weaving together in an intricate, hypnotic pattern that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. But what drew my attention most was the figure standing beside the orb. It was humanoid, but not quite human. Its skin shimmered like the walls of the lighthouse, its form shifting subtly, as though it couldn't fully solidify. It turned to face me, and I was struck by its eyes, two endless voids that seemed to pull at my very soul. "You've come," it said, its voice resonating with the melody. It wasn't speaking with words, but directly into my mind, its tone both soothing and terrifying. "All are drawn to the light eventually." "What is this place?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "What are you?" "This is the heart," it replied, gesturing toward the orb. "The beacon. It calls to those who are lost, who wander the seas without purpose. It offers solace, shelter, and in return, it takes." "Takes what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Your hope," it said simply. "Your longing to escape, your will to survive. All of it feeds the light, keeps it alive. And once it has taken everything, you become part of it, like those you've seen below. The ghostly figures, the whispers, the stories of despair and loss. It all made sense now. The lighthouse wasn't just a trap, it was a parasite, feeding on the very essence of its victims. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I won't let it take me." The creature tilted its head as though amused. "You think you can resist? They all do at first. But the melody always wins. It is the sound of inevitability." The orb's glow intensified, the melody rising to a deafening crescendo. I felt it pulling at me, digging into my thoughts, stirring memories of home, of loved ones, of everything I wanted to return to. It twisted those memories, turning them into painful reminders of what I had lost and what I would never see again. "No!" I screamed, forcing myself to move. I lunged toward the orb, driven by a desperate instinct to destroy it, to break the lighthouse's hold. The creature moved to block me, but I was faster. My hands closed around the orb, its surface burning cold against my skin. The moment I touched it, the melody exploded in my mind. Images flooded my thoughts, endless seas, storms that never ceased, countless sailors drawn to the light and consumed by its hunger. The pain was overwhelming, but I held on, pouring every ounce of my will into resisting the pull. "You cannot fight the light," the creature said, its voice echoing with fury. "You belong to it now." But something inside me pushed back. A stubborn spark of defiance refused to be extinguished. I focused on that spark, letting it grow, letting it burn. The orb's glow flickered, the melody faltering for the first time. The creature let out a shrill, inhuman sound, its form twisting violently. The light around me dimmed, and I felt the lighthouse itself shudder, as though it were alive and in pain. I didn't know if I was winning or if I was simply delaying the inevitable, but I refused to let go. With a final surge of effort, I squeezed the orb with all my strength. A deafening crack echoed through the room as the crystalline surface shattered, shards scattering like drops of frozen light. The melody stopped abruptly, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. The creature let out a final, anguished cry before it dissolved into mist, its form unraveling into the air. The walls of the lighthouse dimmed, their glow fading into darkness. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the floor beneath me crumbled. I fell, plunging into the cold embrace of the ocean. The water closed over me, and for a moment, I thought it was the end. But instead of sinking, I felt myself being lifted, carried upward by an unseen force. When I broke the surface, the stormy sky had returned, the waves crashing around me with furious energy. I gasped for air, clinging to a piece of driftwood as I tried to make sense of what had happened. The lighthouse was gone, leaving no trace of its existence. Only the melody remained, faint and distant, like a fading memory. In the days that followed, I was rescued by a passing ship. I told no one of what I'd experienced, fearing they would think me mad. But the memory of the lighthouse haunts me still, its melody echoing faintly in the back of my mind. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can see its glow on the horizon, waiting for its next victim. Thanks for watching. If this story gave you chills, please hit that like button and subscribe for more eerie creepypastas. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.